Hey everybody, it's Andrew at Amp Welcome to Western Music Zero, Week 1, Notation 1. This is a re-upload of the live that went up a few weeks ago because it was made apparent to me that my setup wasn't quite delivering everything in a very clear manner. There were a couple of hiccups in the audio and video, so hopefully this one will work a lot better for you. This course basically is just designed to give you the skill set to be able to sight read in any situation that uses Western music. Now, are you going to be a professional sight reader by the end of this? No, but you will have enough of a skill set to just jump in and be able to follow along, especially if there's already somebody in your soprano, alto, tenor, or bass group that is kind of a section leader and knows their part very well. So, every lesson in Western Music Zero is actually just me running through these lessons on musictheory.net. Musictheory.net is an incredible resource for all things Western music. If you do all of the lessons on here, you actually will get an education of a sophomore college level music theory. It goes all the way into harmonic analysis and all this other stuff that we won't cover in this course. But the first half of this course is basically going to be these lessons. And then we'll get into doing some sight reading exercises. So we're just going to go through a few of these lessons. We're going to start from the staff and work our way right down to the steps and accidentals portion of this site. The second week of meter and scales is already up. So watch this first, unless it's too remedial for you, and then skip right to the second week if you already know all of this. So here we go. So, Western music is organized like this. It has a staff, and the staff is basically the notepad for Western music. It has 5 lines, usually. And as you can see, in between those 5 lines, there's 4 spaces. And each line and space corresponds to a white key on a piano. So you see here, it starts with the lowest line, which we're calling E right now. There it corresponds to the E here. And then as it goes up, one by one, you go up 1 key on the piano. Now, how do we determine what note is on what line? We use these things, these fun, wacky little things called clefs. And clefs are just a fancy calligraphic way of saying this line on the staff is G, or it's F, or it's C. We'll talk about how these 2 clefs work in just a second. These are the 2 clefs that you usually see. It's just a treble clef and a bass clef. And as he scooches over there, it usually is shown at the beginning of every line. And as you can see, it kind of creates this little circle around the 4th line from the top. And it also kind of looks like a fancy little G. So this clef says that this line is G. So if you go to the space above it, that'll be A. If you go to the space below it, it'll be F. If you go 2 notes below, in other words, to the next line, it'll be G, F, E, as you can see here. So as it moves up, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now what happens when you get to the top of the staff like this? You have no more lines to go to. Well, you just draw one and then put a note there. Same thing goes for the bass clef. This is called the bass clef, and it doesn't really look like an F anymore, but I guess at some point it probably did. And it has these 2 dots that circle around this line. And that lets you know that this line is F. So as you can see, clefs just kind of let you know what type of range your staff is going to have. And it works the same way. A space up is G, a space and a line up, so the next line up is A, go back down to F, one down E, one down D, one down C, one down B, one down A, and then one down is G again. So here's the grand staff. This is an 11-line staff. It's basically every note in the treble and bass clef kind of stacked on top of each other. If you remove the middle line, though, it kind of compartmentalizes everything and makes it look a little bit more manageable. You can kind of see that there's 5 lines on top, 5 lines on the bottom. And then you add the bass and treble clef, and you basically have a continuous set of notes, minus this middle line. But what's interesting is if you draw that middle line in between the two staffs, you get a C natural, you get a C. So this is G, remember, so you go one space down, F, one line down, E, 1.5 down, so space, line, space, you have D, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 down. To this line, you get C. Same thing if you come up from here, which as we know is F, F, G, A, B, C. So this is why this is called middle C. Ta-da! And so that's the basics of the staff. Moving right along, we're going to talk about notes and their rhythms. So these are your kind of the notes that you'll typically see in Western music. Sometimes they'll be upside down, they'll be flipped around, and this little thing called a stem will be pointing down. But this is what they look like. That's a whole note. That's a half note. It's half as long as the whole note. See? So this is whole. If this is whole, 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 then it would be half, 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 whole, whole, half, 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 right? Pretty basic. Now guess what happens here? A quarter is half of the half. So now let's make that whole a little slower. Whole, 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 whole. Let's do halves. Half, 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 half. Let's do quarters. Quarter, 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 and back to whole and hold. 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 So that's kind of how all of this is organized. And as you can imagine, as it goes to the next sets of notes, which have these things called flags on them, they're even half of that. So now that's half of a quarter. Everything's divided by twos. So now you have 2 flags. That's half of the one with one flag, which is a quarter of a quarter. It's called a 16th note. And you can just keep adding flags. So then you have this. You have whole, right? So whole, half, half, quarter, 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 eighth, 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 eighth. So that's a 16th, and I'm doing on my legs. So if I go like this, whole, whole, half, half, quarter, 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 eighth, 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 eighth. See what I mean? Like it all just kind of divides in 2. And that's the entirety of the hierarchy of these notes. Now let's talk about measures. So measures are basically just ways to break your music into little bite-sized pieces so you can kind of figure out what's going on phrase by phrase. Just divide your staff into 2 measures by putting a line in the middle. and then you can put a certain amount of music in each measure. How do you do that? You use a thing called a time signature. Now, time signature has two numbers in it that usually means something very specific. We'll talk about it in just a second. It means on the top, there's 4 types of beats or pulses, and the bottom number is the denominator in what type of fractional note that beat will get. So you see here, it's 4 quarter notes. So you can imagine here, this is going to be 3 of these quarter notes. Watch. See that? So the first one here, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you were to loop that measure, it would loop every 4 quarter notes. This one's 3/4, so it goes like this. 1, 2, 3. Measure 2, 3. Measure 2, 3. Measure 2, 3. This is the time signature for things like waltzes. You get the idea. Now we have things called compound meter, which we get into in a later lesson. And this is where you have eighth notes as your, or you have 6 pulses on the top, and it doesn't matter how many or what the note is on the bottom, but that will be a compound meter. For now, all you need to know that if you see 6, 8, it means that there are 6 eighth notes in the bar. And let's give you a second to guess this one. 3, 2, what does that mean? It means you're going to have 3 half notes. So watch this. It fits that. That's what fits in that measure with that time signature. And so this is just a quick little handy review of the types of time signatures you might see. You will also, by the way, sometimes see this 4/4 as just a C. And the C just means common time, because this is, in fact, the most common time signature you will run into. If it's a C, with a line through it, it becomes cut time, which is 2/2. Same amount of actual music in it, but the way that it's counted is slightly different. So that's measures and time signatures. Now we're going to talk about rest durations. So this is the exact same thing as the notes, except we're talking about places where you don't sing or play anything. That's what these look like. So what this means is you don't play anything for a specific duration. Because in the same way where we need to be able to measure how long the notes we do sing or play are, we need to measure how long we take breaks in between our phrases. And this is how they correspond. A whole rest, whole note. Half rest, half note. Quarter rest, quarter note. Eighth rest, eighth note. 16th rest, 16th note. You notice that this is the same kind of system. 1 flag, 1 flag. 2 flags, 2 flags. So as the lesson is saying right here, it's kind of reiterating what I just said. They correspond with the same amount of time. So if you're in a composition that's in 4/4, this quarter note and this quarter rest will both take up the same amount of time, 1 beat. And as we said before, the note makes a sound, and the rest is when you actually don't sing or play anything. So, let's do a little clapping, shall we? So, typically, if you just have 4 quarter notes in a measure of 4/4, it's going to go like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Clap, 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 clap. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, let's move to one of those notes and change it into a rest. Now we have 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because 1 gets a clap, 2 doesn't. 3 gets a clap, 4 gets a clap. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, nothing. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, nothing, 3, 4. Now there's all different kinds of rests with all the different durations, the same durations that the notes have. Whole rest, half rest, eighth rest with a flag, just like the eighth note has a flag. 16th rest has 2 flags, just like a 16th note has 2 flags. And then you get a 32nd with 3 flags and a 64th with 4 flags. You'll probably almost never see those. And so in the same way that we saw the note hierarchy, this is the rest hierarchy. So 1 whole rest has 2 half rests, which also has 4 quarter rests, which has 8 eighth rests, which has 16 16th rests. Now you know about your notes and rests. So now we're going to talk about dots and ties. These are dots. These are ties. We're done. No, I'm just kidding. So a dot, what a dot does is it adds a half of a beat to whatever note it's on. So this is a quarter. So you add a dot to it, you get a dotted quarter, which equals a quarter plus half a quarter, which is what? An eighth. Right? But they are all together in one note. You don't go like that. It's just 1, 2, 3. 3/8 notes in length. So it's a way of creating rhythms that aren't exactly in sets of 2 or binary like that. You don't have to divide everything into 2. In this case, you can have 1.5. It'd be divided into 1.5. So you have a quarter plus a half of a quarter. So it kind of adds an extra half to the duration. Now you have ties. And ties happen when, let's say, you want to have a half note that starts at the end of a measure. But it's called bad orthography to put a half note here and then just continue your measure on over here. So what we do instead is we split the half note into 2 quarter notes and put a tie, which means that this is actually one note. And these are the 2 notes that tie it together. So that's how this looks. If we're going to do 3 quarters, a half note, and then 3 quarters and 2 bars of 4/4, then you have this. And I'm gonna go pa 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 like that and keep the beat with on my leg. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pa 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 pa. So as you can see there, we do 1, 2, 3, 4 held over 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sense? So that's basically the length of a half note. It exactly is. It's exactly a half note because it's 2 quarters. 1 quarter plus 1 quarter equals 2 quarters equals 1/2. But that's how you do a half note if you want it to tie over from the other measure. That's why they're called ties. So you could also write this as it shows here as 1 bar of 8/4 and replace it with a half note. So these 2 things that are fading back and forth are the exact same rhythm, just 2 different ways to represent it. Now here's just a quick little chart to show you how augmentation dots actually look. So a dot and half up here is a half note plus a quarter note in length. A dotted quarter is a quarter plus an eighth note in length. A dotted eighth is an eighth and a 16th in length. You won't see this one very often in our liturgical music. And finally, we're going to go to our steps and accidentals so we can kind of learn how all of these notes work on the staff, how we use our black keys. And I have my piano to kind of help demonstrate the sound for that. So let's talk about half steps and whole steps first. A half step is if you look at this piano, the distance from one key to the very next key is a half step. So from here, from this thing that says C3 to the very next key, which is the black key. Here's what this sounds like. That's what a half step sounds like. So as you can see here, that's what I just played. C to the C sharp. That's a half step. Also known as a semitone, if you would like to sound a little more proper. But it doesn't always have to be between a white and a black key. As you can see right here, you have two white keys right next to each other. And that sounds like this. See that? It just has to be the very next key. So if you have a black key in between two white keys, then the half step goes to a black key. If you don't have any black keys, like here, in between the two white keys, then it doesn't go to a black key. Now, a whole step is two half steps. So, if you want to go from 1 to 2, that's a half step. If you want to go from 1 to 3, that's a whole step. Here's what it sounds like. Here's a half step. Here's a whole step. Na 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 na. Do re is a whole step. Now, what are these? Flats and sharps. They're also called accidentals. This note, the flat, takes whatever the note is and lowers it by a half step. This note, this accidental, called a sharp, takes whatever note it's on and raises it a half step. So, in this case, you can look at this note here, right in between C and D. You could call this a C sharp because it's a C and it's one half step above C. So you write it as a C here with a sharp on it. Or you could write it as a D flat because we have D right here and it's one half step lower than D. How about E and F? Well, there's no black key in between E and F, so if you take F and you make it an F flat, you actually get E, and vice versa. You can have E here, written with a sharp, you take E and you raise it up a half step, but that actually makes it the same as another white key, F. And that's called an enharmonic spelling. We won't use that term very often. Now, in the same way, you have double flats and double sharps. They raise and lower things by two half steps. So, let's show you how that works. This E double flat, if you write E double flat, it'll be E lowered by two half steps, and it's actually D. Or you could write it as C double sharp. You almost never see those. There's reasons for it, and we'll get into it at some point, but you almost never see double sharps or double flats in our music. Now we have a thing called a natural. It takes away any note, being a sharp or a flat, and reduces it to its white key natural state. So basically what that does is, let's say you have I'll pull out the handy piano here. So let's say you have a C, right? No, we'll go C, D, E, F. Let's say we have an F. If you write F flat, you'll have an E. That'll be the note that'll sound. If you have an F and you put a sharp, it'll sound like that, as that sharp. Now, it'll actually stay that way for the rest of the measure. You also have key signatures which permanently say that Fs are sharp. You'll see that in an upcoming lesson. So how do we get back to the F that's a white key, if it's permanently sharp, you have to write that natural symbol, which is the symbol right here. And that's all of our basic notation 1 lessons for the day. I hope you enjoyed that. We have just one little thing that you can do if you ever get lost. Just type staff note names into Google image search, and there'll be all of these little graphics that show up that you can kind of look at to remember what the notes of the staff are. They usually say it for the treble clef, and treble clef, let's be honest, is what most people are going to be learning first. But it's really not that much different than bass clef. And then here's just a quick little blow up of that graphic on the right, on the previous page. So the spaces of the treble clef are F, A, C, and E, because this fourth line here is a G. So that's an F, that's an A. 2 notes up is the next space, C, D, E. And it spells face. Now people always have these cute little things for E, G, B, D, F for the 5 lines, down from the lowest line to the top line. In the treble clef, they say every good boy knows fine, empty garbage before dad flips. You get the idea. And then there's A, C, E, G. All cars eat gas. Okay. And then there's one, I guess, good burritos don't fall apart. G, B, D, F, A. Whatever helps you remember it. What actually helped me remember it was just to kind of like get to know the scale, that it actually is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. It just helps you understand that the notes only go from A to G and then repeat themselves. And the C major scale goes from C up to C. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And then every note, and then just kind of memorizing how the notes are arranged when you skip one, because that helps you read your lines. There's other tricks to help you read your lines and spaces. We'll get there later. And that is the end of Western Music 0, Unit 1. As I've told you before, we have already gone to week 2, and we're about to do week 3 this week. We had a great festival last weekend, so we didn't have enough time to even do a live. We'll be back live this Saturday. So stay tuned for week 3 coming up later, and try and catch up, and we'll do week 4 this Saturday. Week 2 is already up, rhythm and meter. So enjoy. We'll see you next time.